want to remind you too that this is a 16-week course. Okay, normally this would be 16 weeks long. You're actually doing it in 8, and that 8 weeks is going to be very condensed as far as what the material. So please do as much as you can. And that being said, excuse me. Uh, there is also online work that you're going to be doing along the way. Some of the stuff will be SB2. Some of it's going to be other things I'm having you look up. Information systems, I have you going to the Neely Library, which is on campus, but they have an actual online information system, and you're going to be looking up certain information for us and filling in the actual fillable PDFs, or basically you're filling in the PDFs and you're going to be sending them back to me. So remember how to submit the work orders and all of your work, coursework. I put little short videos on how to do that. So please always refer to that, and that way you'll make sure you get it set properly. I want you to get as much credit as possible. If I see anything that is not, 100, well, I'm not going to say 100%, but if it's not complete, I might end up kicking it back to complete the work order. And this is for all the work orders and all your online work. All right, so with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. The work order information, and this is a fairly short presentation. I will be bringing other things up all along the way, but just to give you an idea, there's different ways of getting information. One of the great pieces of information is actually the owner's manual. Now, that is if the owner's manual is in the car. You may not have that. Some owners have them in their house or have them someplace. But if it is in the glove box, where it resides, you can pull that out and find good information about maintenance, resetting certain lights, and other things that might be how many quarts of oil does it use, what kind of coolant does it require for this vehicle to have. All this could be in that actual manual. So this is that owner's manuals. There's other information systems too. One of the things that we use is a program called AllData. Now, the one that comes from the Neely library, the Neely library actually has an information system that is motors based. It's another system that is out there. It's free for you to use. You are a student of Santa Ana College, and it doesn't have to just stick with what we're doing in class. You could actually use it for your car. It might have the information you need off of it, quarts of oil, or maybe some sensor values and stuff like that. So keep that in mind as you go along. But there's different types of. There's Mitchell on Demand. There's Shopkey. There's AllData. The motors version of it, and there's a whole array of different systems out there. There's also forums that you can be part of and get information from different people. Now, the IATN is another. It's the International Automotive Technicians Network, and this can have a free site, and this can also have a paid site. You pay stuff, you get more out of the site, but it's something you can actually post. You have a particular problem, and somebody else across the state might have the same kind of problem, and this is how they fixed it. And there's different companies like that too, that have specific things that you can actually get information from. And a lot of this may be, and if you're in the dealer level, you're going to have more specific to that manufacturer, which is really great because you get all of the in-depth information from the actual engineering teams and that figured out problems, or they tell you how the whole system is supposed to work, and this is what to do in case something is wrong. So this is something that we have to get used to doing is looking up information, whether it be an independent or it actually is a dealership level type of mechanic. So you're going to be using quite a bit of this as you continue with your career as an automotive tech. So the next thing too is very important, and hopefully you'll get through this tonight, or if you haven't done it on Monday, on Thursday, Tuesday, and one of those days of the week, right? But one of the things that you must is a work order. The Bureau of Automotive Repair is very adamant about this, folks. You must have a work order, whether it be electronic, and it has to be signed by before you do any kind of work on it. So the process is that you start up an estimate when a customer comes into your shop. You're going to start an estimate. Of course, you're going to ask the customer questions about what is the concern of the vehicle. It could even not be that there's something wrong. Maybe you're just doing an oil change on the vehicle. You still have to have an estimate. And this is very important because you need to give that customer an estimate before they allow you to work on the car. If you do it without an estimate, that is a free job. The customer has no responsibility to pay you without an estimate. So you start off with an estimate, a signed estimate from a customer. That becomes a work order. Okay, that work order is what the technician takes from there, and he knows that, okay, this is what I'm allowed to do. This is the parts that I'm going to be using in it. This is the starting point. As we go along, if we see any other defects or something that needs to be updated on it, it's going to be anything from information about the vehicle all the way up, and that's happened to me, all the way to a wrong part or whatever like that. So this is where we're going to be doing some update. And let's say, for instance, you're doing an oil change and you actually see a fan belt that needs to be replaced. This is going to be something that you want to make your customer aware of. But because that does not fall under that guide, that estimate amount that you originally had actually quoted the customer and the customer signed for, now you have to call the customer back and update the estimate and get another approval. Whether you call the customer or they come into your shop and say, hey, we found that the fan belt's about ready to break. It is a good idea to do it now so you don't get stranded out on the street or have other things happen. And then the customer, if he's in person, he has to sign off on an updated estimate. If it's something where you're calling him on the phone, you've got a document. What phone number did you call? What person did you talk to? What was the date and the time of that call? So all this has to be documented, and of course the amount of the the amount of the estimate that was increased. And one thing you do not have to do, and well, actually there's a few things. One thing that you do not have to do is quote tax. I was always good about, okay, how much, they would always ask, how much tax is on that? And I was really good at it, calculated in my head approximately what the tax would be. Customers love it when you're under their estimate, but if you go over a penny over the estimate, then they're actually going to be questioning, why do I have to pay that extra penny like that? So just keep that in mind when the work order is complete. In other words, you finish the work and you kind of went through the whole work order and say, okay, I'm done. Then it becomes an invoice, and that invoice is what the customer is going to pay. This is going to be everything, including tax. Be very specific on what you write. Grammar is a big thing. You can embarrass yourself. You can embarrass the shop with poor grammar. If you have any problems with that, there's some really good English classes, writing classes on campus. We are in the process of working with the community service is about setting up a class just for like our people, where we're actually in industry writing, like work orders and stuff like that. Hasn't been set yet, but there's been a lot of talk in getting this done. So, but then it goes into an invoice, and this is where you are, or your boss is going to sit down with the customer and go through and explain. And it's important that you explain everything to the customer in layman's terms. You don't want to say, well, we had to change and recalibrate the TPS and then reset the ECU, because they're not going to know what an ECU is. They might not even know what a TPS is. You want to use general, normal, everyday terms, like we had to change the throttle position sensor, okay? And after we did that, we had to clear out the memory to reset any kind of faults that might have been in, so it doesn't come up again. We drove tested the vehicle up to specific miles to make sure we double check the throttle position sensor. And you've got to use that kind of terminology with the customer, and they may ask you a question, well, what's a throttle position sensor? And kind of give them kind of a Reader's Digest version, but you want to be clear about it. It's a sensor on your vehicle that reports back to the computer about how much you're pushing on the throttle. And you can do simple things like that, but you want to be clear about it. I always would walk them through everything. And if it was something that I called them about, emailed them about, you can use email also. Text messaging has been approved too. There's another document that you're going to be reading. It's called the bar. Of course, it's the bars, Write It Right. And it gives you good tips on what has to be in a work order, what doesn't have to be in a work order. And it's important that you read that, because I've got a little job for you to do that kind of relates to that document. But anyways, I always had walk through the customer with all the parts, and also I went through the whole part of what labor was done. And then I would go, if there was an upsell, or I should say an increase in the estimate, I would walk them through saying, okay, you remember when we talked about this, I need to have your signature initials over here saying that you agree to it. And then at the very bottom there's a signature where they're picking up the car and they're taking back the vehicle. You want to make sure you get all the signatures, everything in place, because the Bureau of Auto Repair, if they get a complaint and about the work on that job that you did, they will first look at your work order. They'll look to see if you had been given the customer an estimate. They're going to actually look for signatures. They're going to look for if you had an increase in the estimate. They're going to see if you got an approval for that. All this is going in. That's one of the first things they're going to look at. And then they may question you about why you replace this part, and you better have good documentation behind that, because the outset is there could be a bargaining thing where you may have to give back some money, or if you did not get an estimate like that, it could be considered a freebie job, and if there was any money paid, you have to pay the customer all the money back. So keep that in mind when it comes to actual work orders and stuff like that. So this is something that you have to do. Now, one of the books that you might have that you might be working with is kind of shop time. And what I mean by that is, how much does it normally take for a specific job? And it could be quoted in tenths. So when you can't remember everything in your mind of how long it takes to do, let's say and we're coming up with a brake burnish thing, where how much time it takes for you to do a brake job. Not every job, not every manufacturer is going to be the same amount of time. Sometimes there's different procedures that need to be put in place. and sometimes it's a lot quicker. So it just really depends on the car. And some of the stuff you can remember in your head, but a lot of it, depending on what you work on, if you're more of a general type, like what my shops were in the independent field, I had, one day I would have a Nissan, next day I would have a Chevy, next day I would have a Peugeot. It just was all over the place. And I would have to use lookup information that's published. Again, a lot of the same publishers the service information I just talked about, like Shopkey, Motors, and All Data, and the different ones that are out there. You're still you can look that up on those software programs under labor rate area, and it will give you kind of an eyeball of what would be to, and kind of a guideline, I should say, eyeball, but a guideline of what amount of time it should take you to do something. A good example is normally on a General Motors, older type of vehicle, you would quote out like 1.5 hours to change the starter on it. Now, this is General Motors was pretty much, the starter was almost always in the same spot. There may be a little bit of more time needed for certain vehicles, but a lot of it was the starter was on the side, usually on the right hand of the vehicle, between the right bolted up to the engine that's really close to the actual transmission. And that was the way it was for years. And you can almost quote any one of them an hour and a half to do it. And my boss knew I was pretty good at it. In half an hour, I could probably knock one out, no problem. But one day I'm working on a vehicle, and I'm in the middle of an electrical problem. And my boss comes rolling up to me. Well, I should say, come out from the shop, from the office to the shop. He said, "Hey, Marty, I got a good one for you. A customer wants to have the starter replaced on his General Motors product out there." And I said, "Okay, that's fine. Just leave it on the side of the box there. I'll get to it as soon as I can." And one of the things I don't like doing is just replacing things. And I always like to test to make sure that is the actual part that is failed. And believe me, there's times when you're going to wish you'd actually checked before you actually just replace, because that can actually get you hurt. I mean, you're going to lose money on it, what I'm trying to say. But anyways, I had finished what I was doing, and I on the other car, and I decided, you know what, let's see what we got. And I looked at the work order, and kind of like big old flags went off when I seen what it was. It was a North Star Cadillac. And one of the things that if my boss would have took the time to look up the labor rate on that particular North Star engine, which was a unique engine, Cadillac specific, and the actual starter was not where you normally would think it would be. You could look underneath the car all you want, but you would not find it right where it normally would be. This actual starter is down in the engine, down inside the actual engine underneath the intake manifold. And so basically what you have to do is take off the intake manifold to access the actual starter. Now, at that time, when I just went back into my boss's office and said, "No, Jerry, I can't do it in an hour and a half." And he kind of yelled at me and said, "Marty, I know you can do it in half an hour. What are you talking about? You can't do it. You just lazy today or what?" And I said, no, Jerry, come here. And I took him into a room that we had for our computers on All Data software. And I said, I kind of opened up, we started a replacement, and it actually showed 6 hours. And he said, "What the heck? Why would it take so long?" And I went in and pulled up diagrams of where the starter was for him. And he said, "Oh my goodness, I didn't know that. I need to call the customer." So if you do make a mistake on your estimate too, it's okay to call back. Sometimes the customers get upset and say, "Well, you quoted me this," and you say, "I'm sorry, I didn't take the time to look it up." You try to keep from having to do that, but still it does happen on occasion. But the best thing to do is always look up each and every one individually as you come across. You will have some similarities as you go, but make sure you check how much approximately. And there's going to be also some variances in that too. If you see that the bolts are rusted, like they're going to snap, you may end up having to tap out stuff. You got to kind of use your best judgment on some of this. Those books, these labor books, are always a guideline. Okay, so a good example right here is on this particular software. They're actually looking at the burnishing. Okay, burnishing is when you've replaced all the actual brake parts on the brake system, say the front brakes or the rear brakes, and you have to burnish them in. And it's actually a driving sequence, and it's in your and not so much your owner's manual, but in your repair manuals, and it tells you what the procedure is to burnish them in. It may be stopping at a certain rate or going from a fast rate to a stop point. It's to actually burn them in is what they're called. That's why they call it burnishing. Other things you can use to help you out with some of this is actually using tech support. And don't be afraid. Denafix is kind of one of the software programs that are out there, and they do have an 800 number, which it's been helpful. I've used them before. They also have technician feedback on how they solve the problem. And if there was one occasion where I needed a actual wiring diagram, believe it or not, for a Jaguar, and it was an older Jaguar, and their software and some other software that was out there, they didn't go that far back. So I actually called Denafix up, and they actually faxed me over the wiring diagram so I could actually continue with the actual job. So there's other things to do, but when you do call tech support, have all your information. I mean, VIN number, everything. It kind of gives some pre-testing, so you know that they might be asking this question. So always be ready to actually answer questions, to not waste your time, and also sometimes it's per minute, or a half-hour sequences of you actually your calls and how they charge you. So this is a lot of it. Some of it is actually charge amounts. Other things, especially tools that you might have to have in the for your actual repair. In your service manuals, a lot of times they'll tell you need to have a certain tool. You want to make sure that you look up the repair procedure as you go along, and make sure you know what kind of tools you're going to need. Not every engine is the same. This is this is a good example right now. This one actually requires you to have these tools to hold the camshafts in place when you're changing. And what I'm taking from this slide here is changing a timing belt, or you're changing out some kind of engine component and like that. So this is stuff that you really need to read, and this is where it's important that you follow the manufacturer's different procedures. This is going to give you stuff that these specialty tools. And the thing that I worry about, and this is very true in industry, is sometimes when you take out one bolt, you may have just dropped a component down inside the engine if you didn't follow procedure. And procedures will sometimes tell you, do not remove total bolt. It may tell you to back it off 1/4 of an inch and then do whatever procedure and then tighten it back up. So it just really depends, and that's where your procedure is important. There's some vehicles you do not take the bolts out in a certain procedure. It actually can break some of the components. So keep that in mind whenever you're doing. This is where information systems are going to really be a great tool for you when it comes to repairing a vehicle. All right, so this is on service information. My